The last thing I remember before everything went dark was the smell of burnt sugar and the screech of tires. I had been working late at my confectionery, Rosier's Sweet Haven, perfecting a batch of lavender macarons for a wedding order. The street was empty when I locked up, or at least I thought it was. I stepped off the curb, my mind still calculating ratios of almond flour and egg whites, when the headlights came out of nowhere. They say I was thrown 15 feet. They say the car never stopped. They say I was lucky to be alive. But when I woke up in that hospital bed 3 days later, surrounded by machines that beeped in rhythm with my fractured thoughts, I wasn't thinking about luck. I was thinking about him, about Corbin. The name fell from my lips before I even opened my eyes fully. Corbin. Where's Corbin? I heard a nurse gasp, then whispers, then footsteps rushing away from my bedside. My head felt like it was splitting open, wrapped in bandages that smelled of antiseptic and something metallic I didn't want to identify. My ribs screamed with every breath. But louder than all of that pain was the desperate need to see him. "Miss Rosier, please try to stay calm," a different nurse said, her hand cool on my arm. She had kind eyes, the color of warm honey. "You've been in an accident. You're safe now." I need to see Corbin," I insisted, my voice cracking. "Please. He must be so worried. We were supposed to—" I stopped, my thoughts tangling. What were we supposed to do? The memory was there, just out of reach, like trying to catch smoke. We had plans. He's probably looking for me everywhere. The nurse exchanged a look with someone I couldn't see. "Miss Rosier, is Corbin a family member? We've only been able to contact your aunt in Portland." "No, he's—" I struggled to sit up, sending a lightning bolt of agony through my torso. "He's everything. He's Corbin Valerius. Please, you have to call him. He needs to know I'm okay." The name hung in the air like a detonation. I watched the nurse's face transform from concern to shocked. She knew who he was. Everyone in Las Vegas knew who Corbin Valerius was. I'll speak to the doctor," she stammered, backing away. I lay there, tears streaming down my face, trying to piece together the fragments in my mind. Corbin's face came to me in flashes. Sharp jawline, dark eyes that saw through every pretense. That smile he reserved only for me. I could feel the ghost of his touch, the way his fingers would trace patterns on my skin while we lay in bed on Sunday mornings, sunlight filtering through the curtains of his penthouse. We met 3 years ago. No, was it 3 years? The timeline felt slippery, but the emotions were solid as granite. He had walked into my confectionery on a Tuesday afternoon, looking completely out of place among the pastel decorations and the sweet scent of vanilla. He wore a suit that probably cost more than my entire month's rent, and he had bodyguards waiting outside, trying to look casual and failing miserably. "I need a cake," he had said, his voice low and rough, like aged whiskey. "Something that doesn't taste like lies." I had laughed at that, surprising both of us. "That's an interesting request. Most people just ask for chocolate or vanilla." "I'm not most people," he'd replied, and when our eyes met, I felt the world tilt on its axis. From that day on, he came back, week after week. At first, he pretended it was about the desserts. He'd order elaborate cakes for business meetings, claim he needed custom pastries for events. But I knew. We both knew. It was about the stolen moments, the conversations that stretched longer than they should, the way he looked at me like I was the only real thing in his carefully constructed world. Our first kiss happened in the kitchen of my confectionery, flour dusting my apron, his hands tangling in my hair. "You're the sweetest thing I've ever tasted," he had whispered against my lips, and I had melted like sugar over flame. The memories flooded back now, sharp and vivid. Late-night phone calls where he told me things he couldn't tell anyone else. About the weight of his family's expectations. About the empire of casinos and hotels he was being groomed to inherit. About the loneliness that came with power. I remembered the weekend he took me to his private estate in the mountains, where we pretended the rest of the world didn't exist. I remembered his confession, spoken in the dark. "You're the only person who sees me, Elowen. Just me. Not the name. Not the money. Not the reputation. Just Corbin." I remembered loving him so desperately it felt like drowning and flying simultaneously. "Miss Rosier." A doctor appeared beside my bed, clipboard in hand, expression carefully neutral. "I'm Dr. Reeves. How are you feeling?" "I need to see Corbin," I said immediately. "Please, has anyone called him?" Dr. Reeves pulled up a chair, and something in his demeanor made my heart skip. "Miss Rosier, I need to ask you some questions. It's very important that you answer as honestly as you can. You've suffered a severe head injury, and sometimes trauma can affect our memory and perception." "My memory is fine," I insisted. "I remember everything. The accident, I was leaving work late, crossing the street. But I remember everything else too. I remember Corbin. I remember us." "And how do you know Mr. Valerius?" We're together. We've been together for 3 years. He comes to my confectionery. I paused, heat rising to my cheeks despite the pain. "We're in love. Why are you asking me this like you don't believe me?" Dr. Reeves made a note on his clipboard. "Miss Rosier, have you ever met Corbin Valerius in person?" The question was absurd. I almost laughed, but it came out as a sob instead. "Of course I have. We're everything to each other. He knows things about me no one else knows. I know things about him. I know he has a scar on his left shoulder from a childhood accident. I know he drinks his coffee black with exactly 1 sugar cube. I know he has nightmares about losing control, about becoming the monster people expect him to be. I know..." I stopped, because Dr. Reeves was looking at me with something that resembled pity, and it made me want to scream. "I know he loves me," I finished, my voice breaking. "And he needs to know I'm okay. Please." There was a long silence. Then Dr. Reeves stood. "I'm going to consult with my colleagues. In the meantime, please rest. We're monitoring your condition closely." After he left, I lay there staring at the ceiling tiles, counting them to keep from falling apart. 48 tiles. 48 pieces of evidence that this was real, that I was here, that something was wrong with how everyone was treating me. The door opened again, and the honey-eyed nurse returned. "Miss Rosier," she said softly, "there's been a development. Mr. Valerius has been contacted." My heart soared. "He's coming? He's here," she said, and her expression was unreadable. "He arrived 20 minutes ago. But Miss Rosier, I need to prepare you." "I don't need preparation," I interrupted, trying again to sit up, ignoring the screaming protests from my battered body. "I need to see him, please." She hesitated, then nodded. "I'll send him in." The seconds that followed felt like hours. I tried to smooth my hospital gown, winced at the tangles I could feel in my hair, wished desperately that I didn't look like I'd been hit by a car. Because I had been, and the absurdity of worrying about my appearance in this moment almost made me laugh. Then the door opened, and Corbin Valerius walked in. He was exactly as I remembered, and somehow even more devastating in person. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the kind of controlled power that made people step aside without realizing why. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, like he'd been running his hands through it, a gesture I knew meant he was stressed. He wore a black shirt with the top buttons undone, revealing the hollow of his throat that I had kissed 1,000 times in my memories. but it was his eyes that held me captive. Dark and intense, they swept over me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Concern? Confusion? Something else? Corbin, I breathed, and tears spilled over again. You came. I knew you would come. He stood frozen near the door, and for a moment, I thought I saw something flicker across his face. Surprise? Recognition? But then his expression shuddered, became unreadable. Elawan Rosier? His voice was exactly as I remembered it. Low, rough, commanding. The sound of it sent warmth cascading through my chest despite everything. Yes, I whispered. Yes, it's me. I'm sorry I worried you. I'm sorry My voice broke. I thought I'd never see you again. He took a step closer, his movements careful, deliberate. The hospital called me. They said you were asking for me, repeatedly. Of course I was asking for you, I said, confusion creeping in through the relief. Why was he talking to me like this? So formal, so distant. Corbin, what's wrong? Are you angry with me? I know I shouldn't have been walking alone that late, but the order was important, and Miss Rosier. He moved closer to the bed, and I could see the tension in his shoulders, the tight set of his jaw. I need you to tell me something, and I need you to think very carefully before you answer. Have we met before? The world tilted again, but this time in the wrong direction. What? Have we? He repeated slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. Ever met before this moment? I stared at him, waiting for the punchline, for the smile that would tell me this was some kind of joke. A terrible, poorly timed joke, but a joke nonetheless. But his expression remained serious, almost clinical in its intensity. Corbin, this isn't funny, I said, my voice small. Why are you... Please answer the question. Yes! The word came out as a shout, pain lancing through my ribs at the force of it. Yes, we've met. We've more than met. We're together. We've been together for 3 years. You know me. I know you. You're the one who... I stopped, panic starting to claw up my throat. Corbin, why are you doing this? What's happening? He pulled up the chair Dr. Reeves had used, sitting down slowly, his eyes never leaving my face. When he spoke again, his voice was softer but no less intense. Elawan, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I have never seen you before in my life. The words hit me like a second impact, worse than the car. The room spun. The machines around me started beeping faster, matching my racing heart. No, I whispered. No, that's not. That can't be true. You're confused. Maybe you hit your head too? Maybe... I didn't hit my head, he said, and there was something almost gentle in his tone now. I received a call from the hospital because my family donated to the neurological wing. They thought I might be able to help since you were asking for me so desperately. But Elawan, I swear to you, I have no memory of ever meeting you. But that's impossible, I said, tears streaming freely now. That's impossible because I remember everything. I remember the first time you came to my confectionery. You ordered a cake that didn't taste like lies. You came back every week after that. You told me about your nightmares. You showed me the scar on your shoulder from falling out of a tree when you were 7. We went to your mountain estate. You said I was the only person who saw the real you. You said... My voice broke completely. You said you loved me. Something shifted in his expression. His eyes widened slightly, and his body went very still. What did you say about a scar? On your left shoulder, I managed through my tears. From when you were 7. You fell out of a tree trying to rescue a bird's nest. Your father was furious because you ruined a business dinner. The scar is shaped like a crescent moon." The color drained from Corbin's face. He stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "How do you know that?" "Because you told me," I sobbed. "Because we're us. Corbin, please believe me." He stared at me for a long moment, and I watched a dozen emotions flicker across his features. Shock, disbelief, confusion, and something else. Something that looked almost like fear. "No one knows about that scar," he said quietly. "No one. I've never told anyone about it. It's not visible unless—" He stopped, his jaw clenching. "How do you know about it?" "I've seen it," I whispered. "I've touched it. I've kissed it. Corbin, I know you, I know—" "What else?" The question came out harsh, demanding. He moved closer to the bed, looming over me now, his intensity almost frightening. "What else do you think you know about me?" And despite the fear, despite the confusion, despite the pain radiating through every inch of my body, I told him. I told him everything I remembered, every detail of the life we'd shared, every moment we'd stolen, every secret he'd whispered in the dark. I watched his face transform with each revelation, watched him struggle between disbelief and something that looked terrifyingly like recognition. When I finally stopped, exhausted and hoarse, he was silent for a long time. "This is impossible," he finally said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I know," I whispered, "but it's true. All of it is true. You're Corbin Valerius, and I'm Eloan Rosier, and somehow, some way, we belong to each other." He looked at me then, with an expression I couldn't read, something raw and vulnerable and utterly captivating. "You really believe that, don't you?" "It's not belief," I said softly. "It's truth, and somewhere inside you, you know it too. Otherwise, you wouldn't still be here." The machines beeped steadily around us. Outside the room, I could hear the distant sounds of the hospital. Pages overhead, footsteps in corridors, life continuing despite impossible revelations. Corbin Valerius reached out slowly, hesitantly, and his fingers brushed against mine where they lay on the white hospital sheets. The touch sent electricity through my entire body. "Tell me more," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Tell me everything you remember. I need to understand this." So I did. And as I spoke, as I wove the story of us that existed only in my fractured mind, I watched Corbin fall under the spell of a romance that had never happened but felt more real than anything either of us had ever known. The morphine drip had been reduced, Dr. Reeves told me, because they needed to assess my cognitive function without pharmaceutical interference. What that meant in practice was that everything hurt more. My ribs, my head, the kaleidoscope of bruises painting my skin purple and green. But my thoughts were sharper, clearer. And with that clarity came the devastating realization that Corbin still didn't remember me. He kept coming back, though. That was something. It had been 4 days since the accident. 4 days of tests and scans and concerned doctors conferring in hushed tones outside my room. 4 days of Corbin appearing at odd hours, early morning before the city woke, late evening when the hospital quieted, sitting in that same chair, asking questions, listening to my answers with an intensity that made my skin feel too tight. "Tell me about the coffee again," he said on the 5th day. He was wearing a navy suit this time, though he'd lost the jacket somewhere and rolled up his sleeves. I tried not to stare at his forearms, at the way the tendons moved when he clasped his hands together. "Black with 1 sugar cube," I repeated, probably for the 10th time. "Not granulated sugar. You said it had to be a cube because your grandfather drank it that way, and he was the only person in your family who ever let you be a kid." Corbin's expression flickered. "My grandfather died when I was 12. "I know," I said softly. You told me you still think about him every time you drink coffee, that it's like a morning ritual of remembering. He stood abruptly, pacing to the window. From my bed, I could see the Las Vegas skyline in the distance, glass towers catching the afternoon sun like broken mirrors. Somewhere out there was his empire, the Valerius Grand, the Obsidian Crown Casino, a dozen other properties that bore his family's name and reputation. My security team ran a complete background check on you, he said, not looking at me. Eloane Rosier, 26 years old, owner of Rosier's Sweet Haven on 5th Street. You've been there for 4 years, clean record, no connections to organized crime, no gambling debts, no reason to know anything about me beyond what's in the newspapers. I don't care about your money, I said, and heard how defensive it sounded. I never did. According to the investigation, you've never even been to one of my casinos. You know I don't gamble, I countered. I told you that. You thought it was funny, remember? You said I was the only person in Vegas who didn't want to take a chance. He turned from the window, his dark eyes finding mine. And what did you say to that? The memory rose, clear as glass. I said I'd already taken the biggest gamble of my life by falling in love with you. Something cracked in his expression. He moved back to the chair, sat down heavily. How do you do that? Do what? Make it sound so real. Make me want to believe you. Because it is real, I insisted, frustration bleeding into my voice. Corbin, I can't explain how or why, but I know you. I know the man behind the reputation. I know you're afraid of becoming like your father. I know you donate anonymously to children's hospitals because you think doing it publicly would just be another power play. I know you have a scar on your shoulder, and you drink your coffee a specific way, and you... Stop. The word came out harsh. He ran a hand through his hair, and I watched it fall back perfectly into place. Just stop. Do you understand how impossible this is? Do you understand what you're describing? A relationship, I said. I'm describing a relationship. No. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, close enough that I could smell his cologne, cedar, and something darker, more complex. You're describing something that never happened. That can't have happened. I would remember you, Eloane. If even half of what you're saying were true, I would remember. Then why do you keep coming back? The question burst out of me. If you think I'm crazy or lying or whatever explanation makes sense to you, why are you here? You're one of the most powerful men in Las Vegas. You could have left this to the hospital staff. You could have washed your hands of the whole situation. But you keep coming back. He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low, almost dangerous. Because you know things you shouldn't know. Because every detail you give me is accurate. Because... He stopped, jaw clenching. Because? Because when I look at you, I feel something I don't understand. The admission hung in the air between us. My heart was doing something complicated in my chest, a rhythm the machines couldn't quite capture. What do you feel? I asked softly. He stood again, and I recognized the movement for what it was. Retreat. Corbin Valerius, who commanded boardrooms and built empires, was running from whatever was happening in this hospital room. I need to go, he said. I have a meeting. Corbin, wait. But he was already moving toward the door. He paused with his hand on the handle, his back to me. I hired a private neurologist, Dr. Sarah Chen, the best in the country. She'll be here tomorrow to consult on your case. I don't need another doctor telling me my memories are false, I said, bitterness creeping in. I need you to believe me. He looked back over his shoulder, and the expression on his face was devastating in its complexity. I'm trying, he said. God help me, I'm trying. Then he was gone, and I was alone again with the beeping machines and the impossible truth of my memories. Dr. Sarah Chen arrived the next morning with an impressive credential list and a no-nonsense demeanor that reminded me of my Aunt Margaret. She was in her 50s, sharp-eyed, with silver threading through her black hair. "Miss Rosier," she said, pulling up the now familiar chair. "I've reviewed your scans and medical history. I want to talk to you about something called confabulation." "I know what confabulation is," I said tiredly. "Dr. Reeves already explained it. It's when your brain fills in missing memories with false information." "Correct. And in cases of severe head trauma, it's not uncommon." She pulled out a tablet, swiping through images. "Your injury was significant. You have a skull fracture, brain swelling, and multiple contusions. The brain is a remarkable organ, Miss Rosier, but it's also fragile. When it's damaged, it tries to make sense of the world, even if that means creating narratives that feel completely real to the person experiencing them. My memories of Corbin aren't confabulations," I said flatly. "What makes you so certain?" "Because..." I stopped, trying to organize my thoughts. "Because they're too detailed, too specific. I don't just remember vague feelings or impressions. I remember conversations, exact words, moments that are too vivid to be invented." Dr. Chen nodded, like she'd expected this answer. "That's actually characteristic of confabulation. The brain doesn't create vague memories. It creates convincing ones, complete with sensory details, emotional resonance, and internal consistency. To the person experiencing them, they're indistinguishable from real memories." "But the things I know about him," I pressed. "The scar, the coffee, his grandfather, those are all true. How would I know those things if we'd never met?" "That," Dr. Chen said carefully, "is the interesting question. Mr. Valerius has asked me to explore every possibility. So let's think about this logically. How might you have acquired information about him?" I wanted to argue, but there was something in her tone that made me pause. She wasn't dismissive. She was genuinely curious. "I don't know," I admitted. "I've been thinking about it constantly. My confectionery is on 5th Street. His office building is across the street. Maybe I saw him coming and going. But that doesn't explain the personal details. Those aren't things you'd know from observation." "Tell me about your confectionery," Dr. Chen said. "How long have you been there?" 4 years. I opened it right after culinary school." "And it's across from the Valerius Tower?" "Yes, I have a good view of the plaza from my kitchen window." Something shifted in Dr. Chen's expression. "So you would have seen him regularly. Not met him, necessarily, but seen him." "I guess," I said slowly. "But I don't remember." I stopped, because that was the problem, wasn't it? What I remembered and what was real seemed to be two different things. "The human brain is very good at filling in blanks," Dr. Chen continued. "You see someone regularly from a distance. Maybe you overhear conversations in the plaza. Maybe you read articles about the Valerius family. They're quite prominent in local media. Your brain takes all these fragments and, in a moment of extreme trauma, weaves them into a cohesive narrative. A story that feels real because it's built from real pieces." "That's not what happened," I insisted, but even I could hear the uncertainty creeping into my voice. "What's the first memory you have of meeting him?" I closed my eyes, reaching for it. "He came into my confectionery. Tuesday afternoon. He was wearing a gray suit. He asked for a cake that didn't taste like lies." "And you're certain this happened?" "Yes, But the memory was slippery now, hard to hold. The more I examined it, the more it seemed to fragment. I remember it. I remember him standing at my counter. I remember. What you might be remembering, Dr. Chen said gently, is the fantasy of him coming into your shop, a wish fulfillment created by a brain under extreme stress. No, I whispered, but tears were burning behind my eyes. Miss Rosier, I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm trying to help you understand what's happening. Your brain is trying to cope with trauma, and it's created a beautiful story. A romance with a powerful man who sees you for who you really are. It's compelling because it's what you want, not because it's what happened. You're wrong, I said, but the conviction was fading. You don't understand. When he looks at me, I can see... What can you see? I can see that he feels it too. This connection, this recognition. Even if he doesn't remember, some part of him knows me. Dr. Chen was quiet for a moment. That's a powerful belief. It's not belief, it's truth. Then let me ask you something. If your memories are real, why doesn't he remember? Head trauma can cause amnesia, yes, but he hasn't suffered any injury. If you truly had a 3-year relationship, why would there be no trace of it? No text messages, no photographs, no witnesses? How do you explain that? I couldn't. That was the horrible truth. I had no explanation for why the love story in my head existed nowhere else in the world. I don't know, I whispered. But I know what I feel. I know what I remember. I believe you do, Dr. Chen said, and her voice was kind. I believe your memories feel completely real. But feeling real and being real aren't always the same thing. And until we can sort out what's happening in your brain, I need you to consider the possibility that your mind is playing tricks on you. After she left, I lay in the darkness of my room, staring at the ceiling tiles. 48 of them. 48 pieces of evidence that I was here, that this was happening, that something had gone terribly wrong. The door opened, and I expected a nurse. Instead, it was Corbin. You're here late, I said, my voice rough. I wanted to know what Dr. Chen said. She thinks I'm crazy. Confabulation, created memories, trauma-induced fantasy. Take your pick. He moved to the window instead of the chair, silhouetted against the city lights. What do you think? I stopped because I didn't know anymore. I think I'm terrified. What if she's right? What if everything I remember is just a story my broken brain invented? What if I don't actually know you at all? You know about the scar, he said quietly. Maybe I saw it somehow. Maybe I overheard someone talking about it. Maybe... No one knows about the scar, Elowen. He turned to face me, and even in the dim light, I could see the intensity in his expression. I don't talk about my childhood. I don't tell people stories about my grandfather. I sure as hell don't share details about nightmares or fears or any of the things you seem to know. So either you're the best detective in Nevada or what? Or something impossible is happening. I pushed myself up in bed, ignoring the protest from my ribs. You believe me? I don't know what I believe, he admitted. But I do know that I can't stop thinking about you. That I've rearranged my entire schedule for the past week to come here. That when you look at me with those eyes and tell me we belong to each other, some part of me wants to believe it so badly it physically hurts. The confession hung between us, raw and honest. Corbin! Don't, he said, holding up a hand. Don't say anything. Not yet. Because if I'm going crazy along with you, I need to at least try to be rational about it. Since when is love rational? He laughed, but it sounded broken. Since never, which is exactly the problem. He moved closer to the bed, and I could see the exhaustion in the lines around his eyes. Tell me something. In your memories, in this relationship we supposedly had, was it good? Were we happy? Yes, I said without hesitation. We were perfect. No relationship is perfect. Ours was, I insisted. You made me feel seen, cherished, like I was the center of your universe despite everything else you had going on. And I like to think I did the same for you. I gave you a place where you could just be Corbin, not the valerius heir or the casino magnate or any of the roles you have to play. Just you. He sat down on the edge of my bed, closer than he'd ever been, and I could feel the heat of him through the thin hospital blanket. "I want that," he said quietly. "I've wanted that my entire life. Someone who sees past all the bullshit. Someone real." "Then maybe that's why," I suggested. "Maybe my brain didn't invent this from nothing. Maybe it tapped into what we both wanted and created the story we wished was true." "That's a hell of a theory." "You have a better one?" He reached out, his fingers hovering over my hand but not quite touching. "What happens now?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I don't know if I'll ever recover these memories properly, or if they'll fade, or if I'll wake up one day and realize none of it was real. But Corbin, right now, in this moment, I remember loving you. And that has to mean something." His fingers finally made contact with mine, and the touch sent electricity through every nerve ending I possessed. "It means you're the most dangerous thing that's ever happened to me," he said. "Because I'm starting to believe in something that might not exist." "Or," I countered, threading my fingers through his, "you're starting to believe in something that exists in a way we don't understand yet." He looked at our joined hands, then back at my face. "You're really not afraid of me, are you?" "Everyone's afraid of me." "Should I be?" "Most people think so." "Well, in my memories, you're gentle with me. Protective. You said I brought out the best parts of you. The parts your family tried to bury." "Christ," he muttered. "You really do know how to make it hurt." "I'm sorry. Don't apologize. Just..." He squeezed my hand carefully. "Just keep telling me these stories. Real or not, I want to hear them. I want to know what it would be like to be loved by someone like you." "Someone like me?" "Someone who sees me as just a man. Not a name or a bank account or a reputation. Just Corbin. That's all you've ever been to me," I said softly. "In my memories, you're just the man I love." He stayed there for a long time, sitting on the edge of my bed, holding my hand, and I told him more stories. I told him about the time he showed up at my confectionery in the middle of the night, because he couldn't sleep and needed to be near me. I told him about the weekend at the mountain estate, how we'd cooked together and danced in the kitchen and pretended we were just two ordinary people falling in love. I told him about the way he'd trace patterns on my skin, how he'd whisper secrets in the dark, how he'd look at me like I was something precious. And I watched Corbin Valerius fall in love with the fiction of us, one impossible memory at a time. They moved me out of ICU on day 7, a private room on the top floor, courtesy of the Valerius family's generous donation to the hospital, though everyone was carefully avoiding saying that Corbin himself had arranged it. The view was better here, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the strip, and there was a small couch where Corbin had taken to spending his evenings after visiting hours officially ended. No one stopped him. No one would dare. "You don't have to stay every night," I told him on the 10th day, watching him settle into his usual position. Jacket discarded, sleeves rolled up, reading glasses perched on his nose as he worked through documents on his tablet. The glasses were new, or at least new to me. They made him look professorial, softer somehow. "I have work to do anyway," he said without looking up. "Might as well do it here." "Corbin, Elawan, why are you really here?" He set down the tablet, removed the glasses, pinched the bridge of his nose. "Because if I'm at home, I'm thinking about you. If I'm at the office, I'm thinking about you. At least here, I can see that you're okay while I'm thinking about you." My breath caught. "That's the most honest thing you've said to me." "I'm trying to be less of a liar," he said with a wry smile. "Apparently, you prefer men who don't taste like lies." Despite everything, I laughed. The sound surprised both of us. "I can't believe you remember that line. I remember everything you've told me. I have an excellent memory. It's infuriating that I don't remember the actual events you're describing. Dr. Chen says I should be getting better. My scans are improving. They're talking about releasing me in a few days. Something flickered across his face. And then what? Then I go back to my apartment. Back to my confectionery. Back to my life. I hesitated. Without you. That's not necessarily true. Isn't it? What exactly are we doing here, Corbin? You don't believe my memories are real. I'm starting to question them myself. When I'm released, you'll go back to your empire, and I'll go back to making cupcakes. And this will become a strange story we tell ourselves about a week we spent in a hospital room. Is that what you think will happen? I don't know what to think anymore. He stood, moving to the window. The city sprawled below us, all neon and promise and barely concealed desperation. I had my security team pull surveillance footage. I sat up straighter. What? From my office building. From the plaza across from your confectionery. I wanted to see if there was any evidence of us meeting. Any interaction we might have had that could explain your memories. My heart was hammering. And? Nothing. There's footage of me coming and going, obviously. There's footage of you in your shop window sometimes, when the angle's right. But we never interact. We never even seem to notice each other. He turned to face me. Except what? Except you're lying. The accusation hit me like cold water. What are you talking about? He crossed the room in 3 strides, his intensity suddenly filling all the space between us. You told me you didn't remember seeing me before the accident, that the first memory you have is me walking into your shop. But that's not true, is it, Elowen? My mouth went dry. The surveillance footage shows you, over and over again, for the past 2 years, standing at your kitchen window, watching my building, watching me. You track my movements across the plaza. You time your breaks to coincide with when I come and go. You're not just aware of me, Elowen. You're studying me. The world tilted sideways. No, Don't lie to me. His voice was hard now, demanding. I've had enough of lies. Tell me the truth. Have you been watching me? The tears came before I could stop them, hot and shameful. Yes. How long? Since I opened the shop, I whispered. 4 years. I've been watching you for 4 years. He went very still. Why? Because you were beautiful, I said, the words tumbling out now. Because you moved like you owned the world. And maybe you do. Because sometimes I'd see you standing in your office window, and you'd look so alone despite being surrounded by people. Because I told myself stories about you to get through the day, about who you might be under all that power and reputation. Stories, he repeated slowly. Fantasies, I corrected, my voice breaking. Just fantasies. I never imagined I'd actually meet you. You were like a character in a book I was writing in my head, someone impossibly out of reach. So when you had your accident, my brain took all those fantasies and made them real, I finished. Dr. Chen was right. I created a romance from wishes and observations, and 4 years of watching you from a distance. You were never in my shop. We never had late-night phone calls. We never went to a mountain estate. I made it all up. The silence that followed was devastating. I couldn't look at him, couldn't bear to see the disgust or pity, or whatever emotion would be written across his face. I'm sorry, I whispered. I'm so sorry. I wasn't trying to manipulate you or trick you. I really believed it was real. But you deserve to know the truth. I've been lying to you, even if I didn't realize it. I'm just some pathetic woman who spent years creating a fantasy relationship with a man who never knew she existed. I heard him move, heard the door open, and my heart shattered. He was leaving. Of course he was leaving. Why would he stay after learning that everything was based on? The door closed. I looked up to find him still in the room, his back against the door, his expression unreadable. "You're not leaving?" I managed. "No." He crossed back to me, and there was something different in the way he moved now. Something decided. "I'm not leaving." "Why not?" "I just told you I've been essentially stalking you for 4 years. I created an entire relationship in my head. That's insane." "Is it?" He sat down on the edge of my bed again, closer than before. "Or is it just human?" "Corbin, let me ask you something. In your fantasies, in the story you told yourself about us, was I happy?" The question caught me off guard. "Yes, you were happy with me. And was I a good man? The man you wished I could be?" "You were..." I had to stop, swallow around the lump in my throat. "You were everything I thought a man could be. Strong but gentle. Powerful but kind. You protected the people you loved, and you weren't afraid to be vulnerable with me. The man in your fantasies," he said slowly. "He sounds a lot better than the man I actually am. That's not true, isn't it? I'm ruthless, Elowen. I've done things to build this empire that would turn your stomach. I've made people disappear, legally mostly, but not always kindly. I've crushed competitors and intimidated rivals. I'm my father's son, no matter how much I wish I wasn't." "I know all that," I said quietly. "I've read the articles. I've heard the rumors. But that's not all you are. I've also seen you stop to help an elderly woman pick up her dropped groceries in the plaza. I've seen you slip money to homeless people when you think no one's watching. I've seen you stand in your office window at 3 a.m, and I recognize that loneliness because I feel it too." His jaw clenched. "You can't know those things from watching." "Can't I? I've had 4 years to observe you, Corbin. 4 years of seeing the moments when you think no one's paying attention. The real you, not the reputation." "And you fell in love with that," he said, and it wasn't a question. "Yes." There was no point in denying it anymore. "I fell in love with glimpses and moments, and the man I thought you might be underneath everything else. And when my brain was broken and trying to make sense of the world, it gave me what I wanted most. A reality where you loved me back. That's a hell of a confession. I'm sorry if it makes you uncomfortable. You can leave. You should leave, probably. Forget this ever happened. I'll recover, get back to my life, and I promise I'll stop watching you from my window. What if I don't want you to stop?" I stared at him. "What? What if?" he continued, his voice low and intense. "I don't want you to stop. What if knowing that someone has been seeing me, really seeing me, for 4 years is the most real thing that's happened to me in longer than I can remember? You can't be serious. Do I look like I'm joking?" He reached out, his hand cupping my face with surprising gentleness. "Elowen, for the past 10 days, I've been trying to make sense of this, trying to find a rational explanation. But here's what I've learned. I don't care if your memories are real or not. What I care about is that you know things about me no one else knows. That you've been watching me with enough attention to see past the reputation. That when you describe the man you fell in love with, I want to be that man." "Corbin, that's crazy? Impossible?" "Probably. But I told you I'm done with lies. So here's the truth. I think about you constantly. I've rearranged my entire life around visiting you. When you tell me stories about us, I want them to be real so badly it feels like I'm losing my mind. And now that I know you've been watching me, that you've been creating this story around me for years, it should feel invasive, creepy. But it doesn't. It feels like finally, someone sees me. Tears were streaming down my face. This is insane. Probably, he agreed. But I've spent my entire life being sane and controlled and playing by rules set by other people. And where has that gotten me? Alone in a tower, surrounded by people who want something from me. Never sure who actually gives a damn about Corbin versus the Valerius name. I care about Corbin, I whispered. I know you do. That's the terrifying part. You created an entire fantasy life around the man you thought I could be, and now I want to become that man. I want to make your fantasies real. That's not how it works. You can't just... Can't I? Watch me. He stood, began pacing the room with barely contained energy. Here's what I think happened. I think you watched me for 4 years. I think your brain took all those observations and created a story. But I also think that story is more true than you realize. Because the man you described, the one who drinks coffee a specific way and has nightmares and wants someone to see past his reputation, that man is real, Elewen. That man is me. You just knew it before we ever spoke. So what are you saying? He stopped pacing, turned to face me. I'm saying I want to take your fantasy and make it reality. I'm saying that for the first time in my life, I've met someone who isn't afraid of me, who sees the man I actually am instead of the reputation, who makes me want to be better. And I don't care if it started with you watching me from a window, or creating stories in your head, or having a brain injury that scrambled your memories. All I care about is that you're real, and I'm real, and this thing between us feels more genuine than anything else in my life. You barely know me, I protested weakly. Don't I? I've spent 10 days learning everything about you. Your favorite color is sage green because it reminds you of spring. You sing off-key when you bake. You're terrified of disappointing people, so you work yourself to exhaustion. You have a scar on your left hand from a knife accident in culinary school. You're allergic to shellfish, but you miss eating shrimp. You talk to your Aunt Margaret every Sunday. You read romance novels and cry at happy endings. You believe in second chances and true love, and that people are fundamentally good even when evidence suggests otherwise. I was openly crying now. How do you know all that? Because I asked. Because I listened. Because I wanted to know you, Elewen. Not just the fantasy version, but the real you. And guess what? The real you is even better. This is crazy, I said again, but there was no conviction left in my voice. Maybe, but I'm done with sanity if this is the alternative. He moved back to the bed, took both my hands in his. So here's what I'm proposing. You get out of here in a few days. When you do, I want to take you to dinner. A real date, no hospital rooms or medical equipment. I want to learn everything about you that I don't already know. And I want to see if we can build something real together, starting from this impossible foundation. What if it doesn't work? What if the reality doesn't live up to the fantasy? Then at least we'll know, he said simply. But Elewen, I have a feeling that the reality is going to be so much better than any fantasy either of us could create. Because this time, we're both choosing it, both building it together. I don't know what to say. Say yes. Say you'll give us a chance. Say you'll stop watching me from windows and start actually being with me. I looked at him, really looked at him. This man who could have anyone, who could have dismissed me as a crazy woman with a head injury, who instead had stayed, who had listened, who wanted to take the broken pieces of my fantasy and build something real from them. Yes, I whispered. Yes to all of it. He smiled then, and it transformed his entire face. Good. Because I've already made reservations for Friday night. Presumptuous. Determined, he corrected. There's a difference. He stayed until dawn, and we talked about everything and nothing. About his childhood and my culinary school years. About the pressures of his family legacy and my dreams for the confectionery. About what it means to be lonely in a crowded city. and how sometimes the people we create in our heads are more real than the ones we actually meet. When the sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of coral and gold, he stood to leave. "Corbin?" I called as he reached the door. "Yes?" "In my fantasy, in my memories, there was one thing I never told you." "What's that?" "You had a scar on your left shoulder, shaped like a crescent moon." He went very still. Then slowly, he unbuttoned the top of his shirt, pulled the collar aside. There, on his left shoulder, was a crescent-shaped scar. "From a tree," I whispered. "You were 7, trying to save a bird's nest." "How?" His voice broke. "How did you know that?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "I don't know how I knew. But I did. I do." He stared at me for a long moment, something profound and impossible passing between us. Then he crossed the room in quick strides, leaned down, and kissed my forehead gently. "Friday night," he said. "Be ready." "For what?" "For everything." Then he was gone, leaving me alone with the sunrise and the certainty that somehow, impossibly, my fantasy was becoming real. I was released from the hospital on Thursday afternoon, exactly 13 days after the accident that had cracked open my skull and rebuilt my reality. Corbin sent a car, a black sedan with tinted windows and a driver who called me Miss Rosier, with the kind of respect usually reserved for actual important people. My apartment had been cleaned, my refrigerator stocked, and there was a bouquet of sage green hydrangeas on the kitchen counter with a card that read simply, "Tomorrow, 7 p.m., wear something that makes you feel beautiful. See." My hand shook as I held the card. This was happening. This was actually happening. I spent Friday morning at Rosier's Sweet Haven, which had been closed during my hospital stay. My assistant manager, Caroline, had kept things running remotely, fulfilling existing orders and rescheduling new ones. But the shop felt cold and empty, without the usual warmth of ovens and the scent of vanilla. "You sure you should be back already?" Caroline asked, eyeing the fading bruises on my face with concern. "The doctor said you need rest." "I need to bake," I corrected, tying on my apron. "I need to remember who I am when I'm not in a hospital bed." Who I am. That was the question, wasn't it? Was I Elowen Rosier, the confectionery owner who spent 4 years watching a man from her window and building fantasies around him? Or was I something else, something stranger? A woman whose broken brain had somehow known things it shouldn't. I started with lavender macarons, the same ones I'd been perfecting the night of the accident. The familiar motions soothed me, sifting almond flour, whipping egg whites to stiff peaks, the precise fold of the macaronage. This I knew. This I understood. "So," Caroline said carefully, working on cake decorations beside me, "I heard Corbin Valerius visited you, multiple times." I nearly dropped the piping bag. "How did you—" "Elowen, this is Vegas. Nothing stays secret, especially when it involves him." She glanced at me sideways. "Want to tell me what that's about? Would you believe me if I said I don't entirely know? Try me." So I did. Not the whole truth. Some things were too strange to speak aloud, but enough. That I'd been saying his name in the hospital, that he'd come, that we'd talked, and somehow, impossibly, were going on a date tonight. Caroline set down her piping bag with more force than necessary. "Are you serious?" "Unfortunately, yes." "Elowen." She turned to face me fully. "Do you understand who he is? What he is? The Valerius family doesn't do casual. They don't do normal. They sure as hell don't date confectionery shop owners unless there's an angle." "I know it sounds crazy. It sounds dangerous," she interrupted. "I'm serious. These aren't good people. They're powerful and they're connected, and they don't let people into their world without a reason. What if the reason is that he likes me? Then I'm worried about what happens when he stops. Her concern was valid. I knew it was valid. But standing there in my kitchen, with the macarons beginning to form their characteristic feet in the oven, I couldn't bring myself to care about the sensible objections. "I have to try," I said quietly. "Even if it crashes and burns, even if I'm setting myself up for heartbreak, I have to know if this is real." Caroline sighed. "Just promise me you'll be careful. And text me every hour tonight so I know you're okay." "I promise." The macarons came out perfect, crispy shells with soft, slightly chewy centers. I filled them with lavender buttercream and set them aside in a box. If I was going to dinner with Corbin Valerius, I was bringing dessert. 7 p.m. arrived with the kind of speed that suggested time itself had a sense of drama. I stood in front of my closet for 30 minutes, trying on and discarding outfits. Too casual, too formal, too desperate, not enough effort. I finally settled on a sage green dress that Caroline had convinced me to buy last spring, and that I'd never had occasion to wear. It was simple but elegant, the kind of thing that wouldn't look out of place in a nice restaurant, but also didn't scream trying too hard. I left my hair down in soft waves, kept my makeup natural, and tried not to think about how this was possibly the most terrifying thing I'd ever done. The knock on my door came at exactly 7 p.m. Punctual. Of course he was punctual. I opened the door and temporarily forgot how to breathe. Corbin stood in the hallway wearing black slacks and a charcoal button-down with the sleeves rolled to his forearms. No tie, top button undone. Just formal enough to be respectful, but casual enough to suggest this wasn't a business meeting. His hair was slightly tousled, like he'd been running his hands through it, and when his eyes met mine, I watched something shift in his expression. "You're beautiful," he said, and it didn't sound like a line. It sounded like an observation. "You're not so bad yourself," I managed, then held up the box I'd been clutching. "I brought dessert." He smiled, and it was the same smile from the hospital, the real one, not the polished public version. "Of course you did. What kind?" "Lavender macarons. They're your specialty," he finished. "I know. I looked up reviews of your shop. Everyone raves about them." "You researched my confectionery?" "I researched everything about you. Seemed only fair since you've been researching me for 4 years." There was amusement in his voice, not accusation. "That's never going to stop being embarrassing, is it?" "Probably not, but I find it charming." He offered his arm, and I took it, trying to ignore how right it felt to have my hand in the crook of his elbow. We took the elevator down in silence, a comfortable quiet that suggested we'd moved past the need to fill every moment with words. The car was waiting outside, the same black sedan from yesterday. The driver opened the door, and Corbin guided me inside with a hand at the small of my back. The touch sent electricity up my spine. "Where are we going?" I asked as we pulled into traffic. "Somewhere we can actually talk without being interrupted or photographed. I promised you dinner, not a media spectacle." We drove past the Strip, past the glittering excess of the tourist zones, into the residential areas that most visitors never saw. The landscape shifted from neon to subtle elegance, houses giving way to estates, estates giving way to desert and darkness. "Corbin, where? Trust me?" It was a loaded question. Did I trust him? This man I'd watched for 4 years but never met. This man whose reputation was built on ruthlessness and power. This man who had somehow made me feel seen in ways I'd never experienced. "Yes," I said, and meant it. We pulled up to a gate that opened automatically, revealing a long driveway that wound through manicured desert landscaping. At the end sat a house, no, an estate, all glass and steel and clean lines, lit from within like a beacon against the darkness. "This is your mountain estate," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. Corbin went very still. "What?" "In my memories, my fantasy, you had a mountain estate where we spent weekends. This looks just like how I imagined it, He turned to look at me, his expression unreadable. "Alawan, this is my private residence. I've never brought anyone here before. Not business associates, not family, and definitely not dates. This is the one place that's entirely mine." Oh. I didn't know what to do with that information. "And it's not in the mountains, but I do have a place there." He paused. "That I've also never shown anyone." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you deserve to know what this means. Me bringing you here. It means I'm choosing to trust you with something real, not just the public version everyone else sees." The car stopped, and Corbin helped me out. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of sage and something sweet I couldn't identify. The house loomed before us, beautiful and slightly intimidating. "Ready?" he asked. "No, but let's do it anyway." He laughed, took my hand, and led me inside. The interior was stunning. High ceilings, an open floor plan, floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the city lights in the distance and the stars above. But what caught my attention was the kitchen. It was massive, professional-grade equipment gleaming under pendant lights, an island that could have served as a workspace for an entire culinary team. "You like to cook," I said, another piece of the puzzle clicking into place. "How did you—" "Yes, I do. It's one of the few things I do just for myself, not for business or image. In my fantasy, we cooked together. Sunday mornings, elaborate breakfasts that took hours because we kept getting distracted." His hand tightened on mine. "Show me." "What?" "Show me what we made. Teach me. Let's make one of your fantasy memories real." I stared at him. "You want to cook? Right now?" "I thought we were having dinner." "We are. We're making it. Together." He pulled me toward the kitchen. "Unless you're not feeling up to it? I can order something if—" "No," I interrupted. "No, I want to. This is not how I expected tonight to go." "Good. I don't want expected. I want real." So we cooked. I taught him how to make my grandmother's risotto, the one I'd supposedly made for him dozens of times in my fantasy memories. He was surprisingly competent in the kitchen, his hands confident as he stirred and tasted and adjusted seasonings. "You've done this before," I observed. "My grandfather taught me. He said cooking was an act of creation, and creation was the closest we get to divinity." Corbin glanced at me. "I've never told anyone that before." "Why not?" "Because in my family, creation is weakness. We're supposed to conquer, control, dominate, not stand in kitchens making risotto." "Your grandfather sounds like he was a good man. He was the only good man in my family." Corbin's jaw clenched. "My father hated that I spent time with him. Said he was filling my head with soft ideas. When he died, my father told me I needed to stop being sentimental and focus on the business." "That's awful." "That's the Valerius way." He stirred the risotto with more force than necessary. "Be hard. Be ruthless. Show no weakness. Certainly don't stand in your kitchen making dinner for a woman you barely know, because she has the audacity to make you feel something real." I moved closer, put my hand over his on the spoon, stilling the aggressive stirring. "Hey, look at me." He did, and I could see the conflict in his eyes, the battle between what he'd been raised to be and who he actually wanted to be. "You're not your father," I said firmly. "You're not your family's reputation. You're Corbin, the man who visits patients in hospitals and researches confectionery shops and brings women to his private estate to cook risotto. That man is good. That man is worth knowing. That man exists because of you," he said quietly. "Because you saw him first. You imagined him into being." "No. I saw what was already there. I just paid attention when everyone else was distracted by the reputation." We finished cooking in companionable silence, moving around each other with an ease that felt practiced even though it was our first time. When the risotto was perfect, creamy and rich, with just the right amount of bite, we plated it and moved to the dining room. The table was set simply, just two places facing each other, candles providing soft light. Corbin opened a bottle of wine, poured 2 glasses, and sat down across from me. "To impossible beginnings," he said, raising his glass. "To making fantasies real," I countered. We clinked glasses and drank, and the wine was rich and complex, warming me from the inside. "This is good," I said, gesturing to the risotto. "We make a good team." "We do." He took a bite, closed his eyes in appreciation. "Your grandmother was a genius. She'd like you. She always said the measure of a man was how he treated people who couldn't do anything for him. Then I hope I'd measure up." We ate in comfortable silence for a while, the kind of quiet that suggested we didn't need to fill every moment with conversation. But there was a question burning in the back of my mind, and finally, I couldn't contain it anymore. "Corbin, why did you really bring me here? To your private space, where you've never brought anyone. This has to mean something." He set down his fork, leaned back in his chair. "Do you want the honest answer or the safe one?" "Always honest." "Then here it is. I brought you here because for the first time in my life, I want to be known. Not the public version, not the business persona, not the Valerius heir. Just Corbin. And somehow, despite everything being backwards and impossible, you already know that version of me. Or you think you do. And I want to show you that you're right. That's a lot of pressure to put on a first date." "This isn't a first date, though, is it?" "Not really. In your memories, we've been together for 3 years. In my reality, I've been thinking about you nonstop for 2 weeks. This is something else entirely, something I don't have a word for." "Continuation," I suggested. "We're continuing something that technically never started, but feels like it's been going on forever." "That's insane. I know. I like it." After dinner, we took our wine to the living room, settling on a couch that faced the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city sprawled below us, all light and shadow and promise. "Tell me a memory," Corbin said. "One of your favorites. Something that felt real." I thought about it, reaching into the tangle of memories and fantasies and confabulations that lived in my head. There was a night, in my fantasy, where you showed up at my apartment at 3 a.m. You'd had a nightmare, couldn't sleep, needed to be near me. We didn't talk about what the nightmare was. We just sat on my couch, your head in my lap, and I ran my fingers through your hair until you fell asleep. You told me later it was the best sleep you'd had in years. His expression softened. What was I wearing? The question surprised me. What? In the memory, what was I wearing? I closed my eyes, reaching for the detail. A black t-shirt and gray sweatpants. You looked... I stopped, heat rising to my cheeks. I looked what? Less intimidating, more human, like someone I could hold while they were vulnerable. When I opened my eyes, he was staring at me with an intensity that made my breath catch. I have nightmares, he said quietly. Frequently, about losing control. About becoming my father. About being alone in this empire I'm building. I've never told anyone. I've never let anyone see me like that. But you want to. With you? Yes. God help me. Yes. He reached out, took my hand, threaded our fingers together. The touch was becoming familiar now, expected. Right. Elowen, I need to tell you something. About why I really believe you. Why I'm willing to make this insane leap. Okay. You knew about the scar. The exact details of how I got it, what happened afterward. That information exists nowhere. Not in medical records, not in family stories, nowhere. The only person who knew was my grandfather, and he's been dead for 22 years. There's no rational explanation for how you could know that. So you think, what? That my fantasy somehow tapped into something real? I think, he said slowly, that maybe you've been seeing me more clearly than I've been seeing myself. That maybe your brain didn't invent these details. It observed them. Not the scar itself, but the trauma that created it. The man who carries that kind of history. That's not possible. Neither is any of this. But here we are. We sat in silence for a while, hands linked, watching the city below. Finally, I worked up the courage to ask the question that had been haunting me. What happens when my memories fully return? When my brain finally separates fantasy from reality and I realize that none of it was real? Then we start over, he said simply. We take what's real, right now, this moment, this feeling, and we build from there. No fantasy, no false memories, just two people choosing each other. What if the real me is disappointing? He laughed, pulled me closer until I was tucked against his side. Elowen, you watched me for 4 years from a window and built an entire love story in your head. You're many things, but disappointing isn't one of them. That's stalker behavior. It's romantic behavior. There's a difference. Said like someone who's never been stalked. Said like someone who's never been truly seen before. I tilted my head back to look at him. You're serious about this. About us. Deadly serious. Which terrifies me for the record. I don't do serious. I don't do vulnerable. I sure as hell don't bring women to my private estate and cook them dinner and tell them things I've never told anyone. But with you, I can't seem to help myself. Why? Because you make me want to be real. Not the reputation. Not the role. Just Corbin. And I've been waiting my whole life for someone to want that version of me. I shifted, moving until I was straddling his lap, my hands on his shoulders. His hands settled on my waist, warm and steady. I want that version of you, I said. I've always wanted that version of you. Real or fantasy. That's the man I fell in love with. Elowen. I kissed him before he could finish the thought. It was soft at first, tentative, but then his hands tightened on my waist and the kiss deepened, became something hungry and desperate and real. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine. Stay, he whispered. Tonight. Not like that. Just stay. Let me fall asleep with you here. Let me see if it's as good as your fantasy memory. Corbin, please. So I stayed. We moved to his bedroom, all clean lines and muted colors, and I borrowed one of his t-shirts while he changed into sweatpants. We lay down together, my head on his chest, his fingers running through my hair in soothing patterns. This is nice, he murmured, already half asleep. You were right. This is perfect. I smiled against his chest, listening to his heartbeat slow as he drifted off. And as I lay there, in the arms of a man I'd loved from a distance for 4 years and up close for 2 weeks, I realized something. It didn't matter if my memories were real or fantasy. This moment was real, and that was enough. I woke to sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows and the smell of coffee. For a moment, I was disoriented. This wasn't my apartment, wasn't the hospital. And then memory flooded back. Corbin's estate, the dinner we'd cooked together, falling asleep in his arms. I sat up, running my hands through my tangled hair, and noticed he wasn't in bed. Following the coffee scent, I found him in the kitchen, wearing those same gray sweatpants from my fantasy memory and no shirt, his back to me as he worked at the espresso machine. You're awake, he said without turning around. How do you take your coffee? How did you know I was awake? Your breathing changed. He turned, holding 2 cups, and smiled. I'm a light sleeper. Comes with the territory. The territory of organized crime. the territory of being a Valerius. Same thing, different PR. He handed me a cup, black with one sugar cube already dissolving. Like this, right? Or am I assuming based on fantasy memories? I took a sip. Perfect. You're assuming correctly. Good, because I ordered these sugar cubes specifically. Apparently, I'm particular about my coffee. You are in my memories. Then let's make it real. He gestured to the kitchen island where ingredients were laid out. Sunday morning elaborate breakfast that takes hours because we keep getting distracted. That was in one of your memories, right? You can't be serious. Why not? I don't have anywhere to be. Do you? I thought about the confectionery, about Caroline probably worrying about me, about the dozen sensible reasons I should go home. Then I looked at Corbin, standing in his kitchen in sweatpants with coffee in hand, offering to make a fantasy memory real. And I couldn't think of a single good reason to leave. I should text my assistant manager so she doesn't file a missing person report. Already done. I had my security team send her a message that you're safe and will be in touch later. You had your security team. I wasn't going to let her worry. Plus, she threatened to call the police if she didn't hear from you by 9 a.m. Very protective, that one. Despite everything, I laughed. Caroline takes her job seriously. As she should. You're worth protecting. The compliment landed softly, settling into my chest. We spent the next 3 hours making breakfast. French toast with lavender cream, scrambled eggs with fresh herbs, bacon that filled the house with its rich scent. And Corbin was right. We did keep getting distracted. A kiss while waiting for the toast to soak. A conversation about childhood favorite foods. A debate about whether sweet or savory breakfast was superior. This is dangerous, I said, licking lavender cream from my thumb. What is? This. Us. How easy it is. How right it feels. What happens when reality comes crashing back in? Corbin set down the spatula, moved around the island until he was standing in front of me. Then we deal with it. Together. But Elowen, I need you to understand something. This is reality. Right now, this moment. This is the most real thing in my life. But my memories? Your memories showed you who I actually am underneath everything else. Maybe they're not factually accurate, but they're emotionally true. And that's what matters. Before I could respond, his phone rang. He glanced at the screen, grimaced. I need to take this. 2 minutes. He stepped onto the patio, and I could see him through the windows, his posture shifting as he talked. This was CEO Corbin, not the man who'd just been making French toast with me. When he came back in, the warmth in his eyes had dimmed slightly. Problem? I asked. Family meeting. Tomorrow morning. Mandatory attendance. My father wants to discuss quarterly projections and some expansion plans. He ran a hand through his hair. That stress gesture I knew. I'm sorry. I was hoping we could spend the whole day together. It's okay. You have responsibilities. That doesn't mean I want them. He pulled me close, rested his chin on top of my head. Come with me. What? To the meeting. Come with me. Corbin, I can't. That's family business. I'm not. Come anyway. I want you there. I want my family to meet you. Are you sure that's a good idea? We've known each other for 2 weeks. Well, I've known you for 4 years, but you've known me for 2 weeks. And I'm not sure your family is going to appreciate. I don't care what they appreciate, he interrupted. I care what I want, and I want you there. Say yes. This is insane. That seems to be our thing. Say yes, Elowen. Yes, I whispered. Okay. Yes. The Valerius family met in a conference room at the top of the Obsidian Crown Casino, a space that probably cost more to furnish than my entire building. I wore one of Caroline's borrowed dresses. She'd dropped it off at my apartment with a note that said, "Don't make me regret trusting him," and felt catastrophically out of place. Corbin's hand was steady on my back as we entered. The room went silent. There were 5 of them. Corbin's father, Marcus, a man who looked like Corbin might in 30 years if all the warmth was surgically removed. His mother, Helena, elegant and cold as ice sculpture. His younger brother, Dante, who watched me with undisguised curiosity. His Aunt Viviane, who'd apparently taken a break from running the European operations to attend. And his Uncle James, who handled security across all properties. "You're late," Marcus said, not looking up from his documents. "I'm on time. You started early." Corbin pulled out a chair for me, then took the seat beside me. "Everyone, this is Eloan Rosier. Eloan, this is my family." The silence stretched. Helena spoke first. "The confectionery owner." "Yes," I managed. "The one who was in the accident," Viviane added. "I heard you developed quite the fixation on my nephew." Heat flooded my cheeks. "That's not—" "She's here as my guest," Corbin interrupted, his voice hard. "And she'll be treated with respect. Is that clear?" Marcus finally looked up. "Is this wise? Bringing an outsider to a family meeting?" "She's not an outsider. Not to me." "Corbin," his father said slowly, "I know you've been spending time at the hospital. Charitable work is commendable, but bringing her here suggests a level of involvement that's— I'm in love with her." The words dropped into the room like a bomb. I stopped breathing. Corbin's hand found mine under the table, squeezed. "Excuse me?" Helena's voice was ice. "You heard me. I'm in love with Eloan, so she's not going anywhere. And if any of you have a problem with that, now's the time to say it." Dante laughed, surprising everyone. "Holy shit, he actually said it. I didn't think you had it in you, brother." "Dante," Marcus warned. "No, this is fantastic. Corbin's been a robot for years, and now he's bringing women to family meetings and declaring love. I'm into it." "This is not appropriate," Helena said. "Corbin, we need to discuss this privately." "No." Corbin stood, pulling me up with him. "We don't. I'm telling you all right now. Eloan is part of my life. She's important to me. And this family will treat her accordingly. Or they'll lose me. Those are the options." "You can't be serious," Marcus said, standing as well. "You'd throw away your position, your responsibilities, your inheritance over a woman you met 2 weeks ago?" "In a heartbeat. Because for the first time in my life, I'm choosing what I want over what's expected. I'm choosing happiness over duty. And I'm choosing her." I was crying. I couldn't help it. Tears streaming down my face as Corbin defended me to his family, as he chose me over everything he'd been raised to prioritize. "Corbin," I whispered. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." He turned to face me fully, ignoring his family. "I do have to, because you're worth it. Because what we have is worth it. Because I'd rather have one real thing in my life than 100 powerful illusions." "Well," Viviane said from her seat, surprising everyone. "This is unexpected, but not entirely unwelcome. God knows this family could use some genuine emotion instead of calculated strategy." "Viviane," Marcus warned. "Oh, shut up, Marcus. Your son's in love. Let him be in love. It's not going to destroy the empire." The meeting dissolved into chaos. Marcus arguing, Helena strategizing, Dante laughing, Viviane defending us. Through it all, Corbin stood steady beside me, my hand in his, choosing me over and over again. We left after 20 minutes, ignoring Marcus's demands that we stay. In the elevator down, I turned to Corbin. "You just declared war on your family for me." "Not war, just boundaries. There's a difference. They're going to make your life hell. Let them try." He pulled me close, kissed my forehead. "I meant what I said up there. I love you, Elowen. I don't care if it's too soon or if it sounds crazy. I love you. You love the fantasy, I whispered. No, I love you. The real you. The woman who watches the world from her kitchen window and creates stories and makes lavender macarons and isn't afraid to tell me when I'm being an ass. I love your courage and your kindness and the way you see the best in people even when they don't deserve it. I love... Stop, I interrupted. Stop before I completely fall apart. Too late for that, I think. We went back to his estate, ordered takeout because neither of us had the energy to cook, and spent the evening on the couch talking about everything except his family. As night fell, Corbin disappeared for a few minutes, then returned with a small box. I need to show you something, he said, sitting beside me. It's probably going to sound crazy. Everything about us sounds crazy. Go ahead. He opened the box. Inside was a ring, white gold with a vintage setting, a single oval sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds. My heart stopped. Corbin, what? Before you panic, this isn't a proposal. Not yet. But I need you to look at this ring and tell me if you recognize it. I stared at the ring, and something in my brain shifted. Clicked. In my memories, I whispered. In my fantasy, you proposed with a ring exactly like this. Sapphire because it reminded you of the twilight sky. Vintage setting because I love old things. How do you have this? Because, he said quietly, it's my grandmother's engagement ring. The only piece of jewelry my grandfather ever bought her. He gave it to me before he died. Told me to save it for when I found someone who made me want to be better. But I described this ring to the doctors. Before I ever saw you. They have it in their notes. I know. I read the report. And there's no rational explanation for how you could know what my grandmother's ring looks like. It's been in a safe deposit box for 20 years. No photos, no descriptions, nothing public. So what does this mean? I don't know. Maybe your brain tapped into something impossible. Maybe there's more to human consciousness than we understand. Or maybe... He paused. Maybe some part of me was always waiting for you, and some part of you always knew me, and your accident just brought it to the surface. That's impossible. So is everything else about us. He took the ring from the box, held it up to the light. In your fantasy, when did I propose? After I recovered. After we'd rebuilt our relationship on solid ground instead of confabulation and confusion. You said you wanted it to be real, not rushed. Then that's what I'll do. I'll wait until you're ready, until you know for certain that what you feel is real and not just fantasy. And then I'll ask you properly, with this ring, and make your fantasy memory come true. I was crying again, damn it. What if I never fully recover my real memories? What if I can never separate the fantasy from reality? Then we create new memories, real ones, as many as we need to bury the confusion. We build something so solid that it doesn't matter what came before. How are you so sure? Because, he said, pulling me into his arms, I've spent 34 years being careful and calculated and safe. And in 2 weeks with you, I've felt more alive than I have in my entire life. So yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure that whatever this is, it's worth everything. We fell asleep there on the couch, wrapped around each other, the ring box open on the coffee table like a promise waiting to be kept. 3 months later, I still couldn't remember the accident itself. Dr. Chen said that was normal, the brain protecting itself from trauma. What I could remember was everything that came after. Corbin's face when he walked into my hospital room, the way he listened to my impossible stories. The choice he made, over and over, to believe in something that shouldn't exist. The confectionery was busier than ever, partly because of the quality of the desserts, and partly because word had gotten out that Corbin Valerius's girlfriend owned it. I hated the attention, but appreciated the business. Caroline had been promoted to full partner, and we'd hired 2 more staff members to keep up with demand. Corbin and I fell into a routine that felt both new and ancient. Sunday morning breakfast that we cooked together. Tuesday evening walks through the city. Friday nights at his estate, cooking dinner and talking until dawn. We moved slowly, carefully, building a foundation of real memories to complement the fantasy ones that still lived in my head. The family eventually came around, or at least stopped actively opposing us. Vivian became an unexpected ally, telling me stories about Corbin as a child that matched details from my confabulated memories. Dante started showing up at the confectionery for free samples and gossip. Even Helena thawed slightly, though Marcus remained icily polite. But there was still a gap, a missing piece. I had my fantasy memories of our relationship. I had our new, real relationship. But I didn't have the truth of how they connected, why my brain had known things it shouldn't, why the ring and the scar and a dozen other details had been so precisely accurate. Until the day I was cleaning out the storage room behind the confectionery and found the journals. They were stacked in a box labeled Old Recipes, pushed far back on a high shelf. I'd never seen them before, but when I opened the first one, I recognized my own handwriting from 4 years ago. March 15th. I saw him again today. The man from across the street, the one who always looks so serious. He stopped to help Mrs. Chen pick up her dropped packages. Nobody else even paused. I wonder what his name is. My hands were shaking as I flipped through pages. Entry after entry, dating back 4 years. Observations about Corbin. Details I'd noticed. Stories I'd told myself about who he might be. April 3rd. He was standing in his office window again last night, 3 a.m. I was up finishing a wedding cake order. We were both awake at the same time, both alone, separated by a plaza and about $1 million of difference in our tax brackets. I made up a story where he came to my shop looking for refuge from his life, where I gave him coffee and cupcakes and didn't ask questions, where he looked at me like I was the most real thing in his world. May 22nd. I overheard someone in the plaza talking about Corbin Valerius. That's his name. I finally learned it. And they mentioned a scar from a childhood accident. I invented an entire story about how it happened. A tree, a bird's nest, a father who was more concerned with appearances than his son's safety. It's probably not true, but it feels true. That's the strange thing about stories. Sometimes they're more honest than facts. I read through all 5 journals, spanning 4 years of observations and fantasies and details I'd invented about a man I'd never met. And slowly, impossibly, the truth emerged. My confabulated memories hadn't come from nowhere. They'd come from these journals, from 4 years of watching and wondering and creating stories. When my brain was broken and trying to make sense of the world, it had reached into this treasure trove of fantasies and made them real. It had taken my fictional stories about Corbin and convinced me they'd actually happened. But here was the impossible part. Many of the details I'd invented, the scar story, his grandfather's influence, his coffee preferences, were accurate. Not because I'd somehow magically known them, but because I'd been paying such close attention, reading between lines, observing patterns, that my subconscious had pieced together the truth. I'd been profiling him for 4 years, and my profile had been remarkably accurate. I sat in that storage room for an hour, crying and laughing and trying to process what this meant. My memories weren't real in the literal sense. Corbin had never come to my shop. We'd never had a romance. None of the events I remembered had actually happened. But they were real in every other way that mattered. Because I'd loved him for 4 years, even if only in my imagination. I'd seen him clearly enough to understand who he actually was. And when we finally met, when my broken brain gave me the excuse to speak those fantasies aloud, it had created the space for something real to grow. I called him immediately. "Elawan? What's wrong? You sound..." I need you to come to the confectionery. Now. I found something. He arrived in 15 minutes, concern written across his features. I led him to the storage room, showed him the journals, watched his face as he read entry after entry. You were writing about me, he said finally. For 4 years, you were writing stories about me. Yes. And when I had the accident, my brain took all these stories and made them real. It wasn't magic or impossible consciousness or anything supernatural. It was just 4 years of observation compressed into what felt like memories. But the details you got right. I got right because I was paying attention. Really paying attention. I was studying you, Corbin, trying to understand who you were underneath everything else. And apparently I'm a pretty good judge of character. He set down the journal, looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. So it was all fantasy. Yes. None of it ever happened. No. We never had a relationship before the accident. No, we didn't. I waited for disappointment, for the magic to shatter, for him to realize that everything had been based on fiction. Instead, he smiled. Thank God. What? Thank God it was fantasy. He crossed the room, pulled me into his arms. Because that means everything that's happened since has been real. Not confabulation, not false memory, not trauma-induced fiction. Real. You chose me, and I chose you, and we built something genuine. You're not disappointed? Disappointed? Elowen, I'm relieved, don't you see? This is better than having a real past I couldn't remember. This means our entire relationship has happened with both of us fully present, fully choosing it. No gaps, no missing pieces. Just us. I buried my face in his chest, breathing him in. I spent 4 years creating you in my imagination, and then you turned out to be even better in real life. How is that possible? Because imagination is powerful, but reality is better. And because you saw me clearly even when you were just watching from a window. You knew who I was before we ever spoke. We stood there for a long time, holding each other in the storage room of a confectionery, surrounded by journals full of fantasies that had somehow come true. Can I take these? He asked finally, gesturing to the journals. Why? Because they're our origin story. Weird and complicated and absolutely perfect. I want to keep them. They're evidence of my somewhat creepy obsession with you. They're evidence that you loved me before I deserved it. That's not creepy. That's grace. 2 weeks later, Corbin took me to his mountain estate. The real one, not the one from my fantasy memories. It was smaller than I'd imagined. Cozier. A cabin nestled in pine trees with a view of snow-capped peaks. I've been coming here since my grandfather died, he told me as we sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the autumn chill. It's the only place that feels entirely mine. No family history, no business connections, just a place to breathe. It's beautiful. It's ours now, if you want it to be. I turned to look at him. Corbin, I'm not asking yet, not the big question. But I'm asking this. Do you want to share this space with me? Make real memories here to replace the fantasy ones? Yes, I said without hesitation. Always yes. We spent the weekend there, cooking and hiking and talking about everything and nothing. On Sunday morning, we made elaborate breakfast just like in my fantasy memories. French toast and bacon and scrambled eggs with fresh herbs. We got distracted, kissing between tasks, laughing at our failures, succeeding just often enough to call it a victory. After breakfast, Corbin took my hand. Walk with me? We hiked to a clearing overlooking the valley, pine needles crunching under our feet, the air sharp and clean. At the center of the clearing was a bench I'd never seen before. I had this installed last week, Corbin said. Because in one of your journal entries, you wrote about us sitting together in the mountains, watching the sun set, feeling at peace for the first time in our lives. I wanted to make that memory real. I was crying before he even got down on one knee. "Elawan Rosier," he said, pulling out the sapphire ring. His grandmother's ring, the one from my confabulated memory. I spent 34 years being who I was supposed to be instead of who I wanted to be. And then you looked at me from a window and saw the truth I'd been hiding from everyone, including myself. You created a love story in your imagination that was so compelling, it changed reality. You made me want to be the man in your fantasies, the good one, the gentle one, the one who wasn't afraid to be real. These past 3 months have been the most genuine of my life. Not because they were easy. My family's still adjusting, the press is having a field day, and we still have no idea how you knew about my grandmother's ring. But because they've been us. Real and messy, and absolutely perfect. I love you. I love your courage and your creativity, and the way you make lavender macarons at 2 a.m. I love that you spent 4 years writing stories about me and then had the audacity to make them come true. I love that you see the best in people even when they don't deserve it. I love that you chose me, over and over, even when it would have been easier to walk away. So I'm asking you to keep choosing me. To let me keep choosing you. To build a life with me that's better than any fantasy because it's real. Elawan, will you marry me? I dropped to my knees in front of him, taking his face in my hands. Yes. Yes, absolutely yes. I love you, Corbin. The real you. The man you actually are. Not the fantasy version or the reputation or anything else. Just you. He slid the ring onto my finger, and it fit perfectly. Of course it did. Some things were always meant to be, even if they took 4 years of watching from a window and a traumatic brain injury to finally happen. In my journal, I said through happy tears. In one of the entries, I wrote that you'd propose with this exact ring in the mountains. I described this moment down to the bench and the pine trees, and the way you'd look at me like I was your whole world. I know. I read all the journals. He kissed me softly. I'm just making your fantasies come true. No, I corrected. You're making something better than fantasy. You're making something real. We sat on that bench until the sun set, exactly as I'd written about 4 years ago. And as the sky turned sapphire blue, the same color as my engagement ring, I realized that sometimes the greatest love stories start with impossible beginnings. Sometimes you fall in love with someone from a distance, create entire worlds in your imagination. And then a car accident and a broken brain give you the courage to speak your fantasy aloud. Sometimes a man who could have dismissed you as crazy instead listens, believes, and chooses to make fiction into reality. Sometimes confabulation and truth and love get so tangled together that it doesn't matter what's real and what's imagined. Because the life you build afterward is genuine enough to eclipse everything that came before. I'd spent 4 years watching Corbin Valerius from my kitchen window, telling myself stories about who he might be. And it turned out I'd been right about him all along. Not because I was magic or psychic or special, but because I'd been paying attention. Really paying attention. And he'd been worth every second of those 4 years of watching. Every journal entry, every fantasy memory, every impossible moment that led us here. What are you thinking? Corbin asked, pulling me closer. I'm thinking that I told myself stories about us for 4 years, and now we get to write the real story together. And I'm thinking that the real story is going to be even better. Better than fantasy? Better than anything I could have imagined. Because it's ours. Actually ours. He kissed me as the stars came out, and somewhere in the distance, I heard the sound of my own laughter. Real, genuine, free. The laugh of a woman who'd loved a man from a window for 4 years, and then had the courage to tell him impossible stories when her brain was broken. The laugh of a woman whose fantasy became reality, became something even better than either one. The laugh of a woman who was, finally, exactly where she was meant to be. We got married 6 months later in the clearing where he proposed. Small ceremony, just family and close friends. Caroline was my maid of honor. Dante was Corbin's best man, and made a speech about how his brother had finally learned to be human. The confectionery expanded to 3 locations. Corbin insisted on being a silent partner, contributing capital, but letting me maintain creative control. "Your vision," he said. "I'm just here to make it bigger." His family eventually accepted that I wasn't going anywhere. Marcus even admitted years later that I'd made Corbin less insufferable. Helena started ordering all her event cakes from Rosier's Sweet Haven. Viviane became one of my closest friends. The journals live in a safe in our bedroom, our origin story, preserved. Sometimes I read them and marvel at how accurate my fantasy Corbin was. Other times I read them and see all the ways real Corbin is better. We never did figure out how I knew about the ring, or the scar, or a dozen other details that should have been impossible. Dr. Chen has theories involving collective unconscious and pattern recognition and the power of sustained observation. Corbin just shrugs and says some things are meant to be mysteries. I prefer his explanation. 5 years after the accident, I stood in our mountain cabin, the real one, where we spent weekends away from the city, making lavender macarons while Corbin worked on his laptop at the kitchen table. Sunday morning, elaborate breakfast, getting distracted by conversation and kisses and life. "What are you smiling about?" he asked, looking up. I was just thinking about how I used to write stories about us, about moments just like this. And now we're living them. Better than the fantasy. So much better. Because you're real. This is real. We're real. He closed his laptop, crossed to where I stood at the counter, wrapped his arms around me from behind. Best confabulation ever. Best reality ever, I corrected. And it was. The girl from the accident, the one who repeated his name over and over. She'd been telling the truth, in her own way. She loved him. She knew him. She saw him clearly even when her brain was scrambled and broken. She just hadn't met him yet. But that was okay, because some love stories don't start with a first meeting. They start with 4 years of watching from a window, writing journals full of fantasies, and being brave enough to speak those fantasies aloud when given the chance. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, the man you imagine turns out to be real. Not exactly like the fantasy, better. Because he chooses to be. Every single day he chooses to be. That's not confabulation. That's love.